This is a download from BFM 89.9, the business station.
Can you elaborate on the types of hacking and other cyber activities the Russians allegedly participated in to influence the recent US elections?
Good morning, Jason. So basically, there were three main activities that was attributed to the Russians' involvement in the U.S. elections. The first, of course, was when Hillary Clinton decided to set up her own personal email server in the basement of her house, and that server was compromised. This you could probably refer it to as the Clinton hack. The second incident, of course, was when her campaign manager, Don Podesta, decided to click on a phishing email. Phishing email basically means that you receive an email from somebody you think you know, and when you click on a link, what happens is a malware gets installed in your machine, and then data gets siphoned off to an external server. So that was the second incident where John Podesta was a victim to an attack, and that was roughly around March 2016. And the third most prominent incident was when the Democratic National Committee headquarters computers as well as their networks were compromised roughly for about a year, from July 2015 to about June 2016. And that's what people generally refer to as the DNC attack. So that's the main three incidents that has been sort of attributed to the Russians' involvement.
So this brings us to the next point in that how is it that the US, one of the most advanced countries in the world, was seemingly not adequately protected against these hacking attacks? And what was the level of sophistication of this alleged hacking, and how serious was it?
Actually, if you look at the sophistication of U.S. as a nation, the private sector is highly sophisticated, and I agree to that. But the government installation, let's look at the Clinton issue, for example. The Clinton's assistants have told FBI investigators that she often has a habit of losing her BlackBerry and therefore buying a new BlackBerry. And they have no clue where the old device was. Now, that's a callous user right there. No amount of technology is going to protect that kind of user. Besides, the email server in which she hosted had no encryption whatsoever. And then they eventually moved to basic encryption, which was still susceptible to sniffing and man-in-the-middle. So when you look at Clinton losing 33,000 emails, it's no-brainer because any kid could have done that. Besides, majority of the U.S. government agencies are still using Windows 3.1. A nuclear control messaging system at the Department of Defense runs IBM Series 1. I think that came out in 1976, if I'm not mistaken. IRS, Master Taxpayer Data, is written in assembly. That's 50 years old. So most of the agencies are running XP and Windows 3.1. The only time when the government installations are shown technologically advanced, for the most part, is only in Hollywood. I do agree that certain agencies are highly sophisticated, but in this particular case, if you look at it, why did they seemingly still get attacked? Because I think while most of the time the United States government and their investigators are allocating their resources to try to unravel the people behind this attack. Now, if they only spent that time in analyzing how they were hacked and try to improve their cybersecurity posture and they become more secure, I think these kind of attacks would be prevented.
And how did the US government intelligence and cybersecurity experts manage to detect the hacking?
That's the interesting part, Jason. They didn't. The Homeland Security claims that they published a report called Grizzly Steep. Generally, you would hear two groups of people being attributed to this attack. The first group, some people call it as APT-29, also known as Cozy Bear, funny names. And these were the group that apparently went into the party system in 2015. And the second group was called APT-28, Fancy Bear, that went in on spring 2016. And primarily the method here is phishing, a method by which you get an email from someone that you think you know, and it seems really real, and when you click on it, your machine gets infected with what we call as a RAT, a remote access tool or a remote access Trojan. The Homeland Security has named a specific Trojan and a specific version. This is where it seems suspicious to me because the Trojan was called PAS and the version was 3.1. Now, at the time of the attack, that particular version was at least a year and a half old. Now, imagine if I was Russia and I have spent all this time developing this malware, and just when I'm about to do a major attack, I use a version that's a year and a half old. That's the first red flag to me.
And what did the US government conclude from their investigations?
Number one, they claimed that Russian language was used in the malware. Number two, they claimed that the Cyrillic keyboard, the kind of keyboard that was used in that part of the world, was used. Number three, the date and time on which these malwares were compiled or created matched to the business hours of Russia. Number four, there was an IP address of one of those malwares that were pointing to Moscow and St. Petersburg. Number five, of course, there was supposedly a persona that claims to have leaked out all these data, and he goes under the name of Guccifer 2.0. That person claims to be a Romanian, but the U.S. enforcement think that he is not Romanian, but it was actually a Russian vehicle. And of course, the last, they claim that there was a website called dcleaks.com that apparently belongs to Russia.
But why do some experts have doubts about these claims?
If let's just say we were supposed to do this attack, and let's just say for a moment we think and we said, you know what, as Malaysia, we're going to launch this massive cyber attack to influence an election of another country. And let's just say if we do it, do you actually think we're going to use the language setting as Malay on the machine? And do you think that we're going to run it in Putrajaya? And do you think that we're actually going to work on Malaysian hours? So that's the part that puzzles a lot of people, and a lot of experts actually say pretty conclusively that there is no conclusive evidence that points to Russia, except, of course, certain media. Besides, there was two important things that nobody seems to cover. Number one is that in some of the documents, there were actually Korean characters in there. Number two is that DC Leaks isn't owned by Russia. In fact, it's not even hosted in Russia. It's hosted in Malaysia. That doesn't mean that we're involved. You know, that's basically how hackers work. They would use something that's completely random and has no connections to them. If I was China and I want to attack, I'm not going to put my servers in China. I'm going to make it look like it's from Russia. If I was Russia, I'm going to make it look like it's China. So that's usually how the attack happens. So just by saying that an IP address points to Moscow and St. Petersburg, and therefore Russia did it, seems pretty immature to me at this point in time.
So how could this incident affect the legitimacy of President-elect Donald Trump's election?
I think not at all, because what got compromised was the DNC, Democratic Party's headquarters, and both the Department of Defense, DHS, CIA, and the FBI has said that the voting system or the computers were in no way compromised or even touched. So the integrity of the votes and the elections were not touched. So in that manner, I would say the elections are still very legitimate and not influenced by this attack.
So when we're talking about this type of state-sponsored hacking, do you feel it's becoming more prominent in recent years?
Definitely, because I think state-sponsored attacks, cyber warfare, people call it as advanced persistent threat. These are activities that almost every nation undertakes these days. But whether or not such attacks are used to influence policies or elections, that's always difficult to attribute without solid evidence and solid trail. But there are some attacks. For example, back in 2007, we had a cyber attack on Estonia that crippled them for a while. In 2010, we had attacks on Myanmar during their elections. And then in 2010, also we had a Japan-South Korea cyber warfare. The interesting thing is how different people perceive different things. For example, while the West sees Russia as a cyber predator, most of the hackers in the East actually look at Russia as a prey. This, of course, didn't get media coverage. When the Americans were lining up to vote, there were massive DDoS attacks or distributed denial of service attacks on about 5 main banks in Russia. And this was carried out by 24,000 bots. And a couple of weeks later, the Russian central bank got attacked. So there were attacks, but just that due to the popularity of the media, we only see certain incidents from certain parts of the world. Now, the concept of whether or not this is going to become more prominent, definitely.
Thank you for listening to this podcast. To find more great interviews, go to bfm.my or find us on iTunes. BFM 89.9, the business station.